Yeah.
So good morning, everybody. I guess it's noon, so good afternoon. We're going to get started. So if you want to kind of gather up around so you can see the exhibits and the presenters, we'll get started. And Margot Cunningham from the City of Albany will start us off.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay?
No.
No? Okay.
Louder is good when you talk.
Okay. How's that?
Better.
All right. My name is Margot Cunningham. I'm Natural Areas Coordinator for the City of Albany. And I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. So thank you. I'm glad to see a good crowd here for this Albany Hill site walk. We're gathered here to see and learn more about what's going on with the eucalyptus on the hill and how we can address fire safety concerns, native plant and wildlife habitat, and monarch needs. And I'm joined here today by staff from the Albany Fire Department. And we have consultants from Restoration Design Group as well, who have worked on projects within the city. And they've also done habitat restoration projects in East Bay Regional Parks. We're also joined by ecologists and biologists from Nomad Ecology, who are experienced in habitat restoration. And we are joined by Stu Weiss, there he is up there in the orange hat, from Creekside Science. He's the foremost expert on overwintering monarchs on the California coast. And I should also mention that today we are being recorded by Jeremy Allen, who's the media administrator for the City of Albany. Okay, if you have not already signed in, and if you're not already on the email list for the Albany Hill Forest Management and Habitat Restoration Plan, please sign in on the sign-up sheet that I'm going to pass around here. If you received an email about this, then you're already on and you don't need to. All right. Okay, and now I'm going to pass it over to Annika.
Oh, do I need to use the microphone? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe just put that over your, face it out. And there you go.
Okay, how's that? Can everyone hear me?
Oh, yeah.
I'm naturally loud, so this may be overkill. Some quick logistics. Thank you for coming. Just so you know, we will be going to see the monarchs, but first, we're going to be here at the Taft Turnaround for a little bit to cover some background on the project and sort of general ecological history and how these projects got started. We'll then walk down Taft a little way to look at some of the erosion and some of the impacts of the eucalyptus on the hill. And then we'll be heading up this way to look at some of the native plant restoration that's been going on and hear more from Stu and monarchs up there. So don't despair, we'll go up, we'll see the butterflies, but first there's some more information. Also, Nat, if you could raise your hand. There's handouts over there. How many of you were at the public education session in November? Can you raise your hand? So there may be some repeated information for all of y'all, but we'll be going over some basics for everyone else gathered here. The handouts that Nat has have links on it to all the research, all the studies, the documents, as well as the PowerPoint slide presentation from the public education session that happened in November. So those are available for you. It also has an email address where if you have questions, you're not comfortable talking in public, or you just think of it tomorrow morning when you wake up, you can email that address, and the project team will receive those and be able to answer you and keep you informed on how things are progressing. That email list will also allow you to be notified when we're doing community design charrettes as this design process continues. So if you'd like to be involved in some of the further community meetings and involved in helping craft the design plan and the forest management plan for Albany Hill, please sign up and stay involved. I'm going to direct your attention over here to this map. This is the project area. Albany Hill is big. You can sort of see it as the green area on this. What we're talking about today is the forest management plan for the City of Albany owned property. And that's the area that's highlighted on this map. So we'll be walking around, and as we walk along the hill, we'll be pointing out where those transitions between city property and public property happen and private property, so you get a better sense of the area we're talking about. Hopefully, the management techniques and what we're doing up here on the ridge will be a model and an inspiration for private landowners and other land managers to continue addressing the issues for Albany Hill. So in terms of general background, thank you for the wonderful land acknowledgement, Margot. Albany Hill, for millennia, was largely open grasslands and oak woodlands along the riparian corridors that fed to the bay. This was a combination of just sort of natural ecological habitat and the local residents' land management practices. So this area, for lots and lots of time, was mostly open grassland on this hill. And Erin will talk more about what kind of habitats we could bring back here and what we could call back to this piece of land. In about 1880, over in San Francisco, the Giant Powder Company had a dynamite factory in Glen Canyon. So if you have ever hiked in Glen Canyon, you've seen the eucalyptus there, there's a correlation. The powder companies, the dynamite companies, and the chemical companies that supported those dynamite factories planted eucalyptus as a blast screen for their industrial activities. So if you look at maps of where eucalyptus are in the Bay Area, there's often a tight correlation between where those powder factories were and where the eucalyptus started. So there were some bad explosions over in the city, and the company decamped and moved over here to Albany Hill. They built, so in 1880 is when the eucalyptus kind of started to show up over here on Albany Hill. They were planted to protect the residents from the Giant Powder Company and the Judson Chemical Company, which was conveniently built right next door to the dynamite plant. There were some accidents here. Thumbnail sketch, things blew up, people were injured. Giant Powder Company moved to Point Pinole. So if you're familiar with all the eucalyptus at Point Pinole, those were also planted by industry to allow them to operate there. Judson Chemical Factory stayed here until about 1905 when it finally burned down to the ground again, and they just didn't rebuild. But this is an industrial relic from that era. These eucalyptus were planted as part of industrial protection. Needless to say, they didn't work for that, and they're actually very flammable. But here they are. And so they're on our hill. And one of the interesting things is that this ecology here, started for one particular reason, but as humans have had impact farther down the coast, the monarch butterflies, who need somewhere to roost in the winter, and they're looking for tall trees on the coastline, the Monterey cypress and their sort of native trees that they had on the central coast are gone. So they're heading up the coast, and they see all these eucalyptus trees. And Stu will talk about how opportunistic they are, but they made a home here. So now we've got these flammable trees that are left over from another era, but they're serving a purpose for something good. So part of what this project is trying to do is to strike the balance between creating healthier ecologies for Albany Hill, dealing with our past, reducing fire risk, but still providing for these monarchs who are really having to make do with what's left over. So that's some of the general background on how the Ukes got here, what this place used to look like, and what we're trying to do. Why are we doing the project? In 2020, city staff started to notice that the eucalyptus were in bad health. The crowns were thinning, and if you look up here, you can see the dead branches on the top. They were stressed, they weren't doing well, there was some disease, there was a need for some emergency removals, so the city hired a bunch of consultants to do a lot of studies. There were 3 different levels of arborist reports, pathogen reports, water stress reports, and a fire risk hazard analysis done. And all of those reports pointed to the need to remove these eucalyptus for health and human safety, as well as for ecological reasons. As we walk around, we'll be pointing out where you can see signs of that stress and signs of that decay. In terms of eucalyptus biology, these trees are Tasmanian blue gums. They come from an environment where they have access to a lot more water than they get here. They are good at mining water. They have very penetrative roots. And when we walk down Taft, you'll be able to take a look and see some of that. But what they actually do is their roots will drill through the sandstone and split it apart and crumble it looking for water. So they're bad for slope stabilization, and they're flammable, but they're not able to adapt to California climate fast enough to really survive or thrive here. You know, our water cycles, climate change is real, all those things are happening, and these guys are not in a good shape to resist pathogens, stay healthy, and stay safe. So we've got limb drop issues, we've got fire ladder issues. If you look around behind you, you can see how those leaves just climb up the trunk, they sprout all the way up, and that creates the ability for any fires that start on the ground to make it up into the canopy. So I'm going to hand this off to Eric Stromberg, who's our restoration director here at RDG, to talk a little bit more about eucalyptus and fire risk, and why we care. Here's the little guy. Sorry. Yeah.
Keep the speaker away from the microphone. Okay. Thank you guys again for coming here today. This is great to see such a crowd. And also in terms of logistics, I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions and a tendency to have kind of breakout conversations. To the degree that we can do what we're doing now and kind of pay attention to the talks and then have questions that come up, we'll try to answer them as part of the group. So once we're done with this presentation, we'll have time for questions, and then we'll walk down a little bit down there, and then as Annika said, head up to the hill. So I'm not going to talk much about the risk, but I think it's great. I talked about it the other night with the community meeting for the handful of folks who were there at that meeting. It's really nice to come up here and look at the trees yourselves. So really the reason this project exists, as Annika had mentioned, is that we have hazard risk, both for fire and also just for human safety. We have a path. We're encouraging people to come use the hill, and if you look up and around as we walk, look up as much as you look down, you can really see what's overhead. Eucalyptus drop a lot of limbs, and then as they get stressed, the whole trees or large branches can fall. So it's not just fire, but it's also just public safety. Sitting on a rock, sitting on a bench, you do that occasionally, not terribly risky, but if there's somebody always sitting on that rock, eventually a tree is going to fall in the vicinity, and that's a risk, a real big risk. So for us who've been around Albany Hill and have an experience here, it's interesting to see in the last 4 years or so how much it has changed up here and why there's a sense of urgency for the city, and I think for many of you of kind of addressing that. Again, the structural fall is an issue, and then the fire risk Annika hinted at too. I think as you look around, you see the dead and decaying debris in the canopy. You see the fuel ladders. You see the ground cover. You get a sense of where the risk is. And I won't get into the details, but I will offer for those who are really interested in the details of fire mechanics and the studies that have been up here. There's a 2022 study that really models like wind behavior and fire spread and spark distances that could be generated from here. And the moral of the story is it confirmed everything that all the other studies said, is this is a very big risk. It can't be ignored. But not just for here, some of these model like a quarter of a mile of spread of embers. So if this were to catch fire on a windy day, we could get embers moving into the neighborhoods depending on which way the wind's blowing. So prominent winds, as you probably know, like we have today, are from the south. So that would send wind kind of towards El Cerrito. But often we have winds, in the summertime, they're blowing from the east, and they blow the hot air, and that would head over towards the west. And you never know when that fire will hit. So I just wanted to point that out. Pay attention and read the landscape as you're walking. I encourage us to do that. That's the beauty of having a site visit. And then with that, I will bring up the lieutenant from Albany Fire, Eric, and he's going to talk a little bit more about fire from their perspective and the past fire that we had last year. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Ordblad. I've been with the Albany Fire Department for about 22 years now. Just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a background. I've been personally on 18 fires throughout the state. Can we hold questions till after? Louder? Yeah. Louder. Okay, gosh, I've never been told to be louder before, so I will do that for you guys. So some of the things that the Albany, City of Albany has been doing to help with vegetation management is every year we come up with a plan and we work with Public Works to improve roads, to get rid of what, Annika was talking about, some of the ladder fuels is what we talk about with these ground fuels that could potentially go up in the eucalyptus. We also work with private landowners to have 30 to 20 feet of clearance around their homes. And we also work with the bigger private landowners like Golden Gate, 555 Pierce, 545 and 535 Pierce to mitigate some of this vegetation that is so worrisome for us. So on June of 2022, we had a fire down off of Pierce Street that was about 1.5 acres. And what was a big deal about that was that it was a mild day weather-wise. It was about 70 degrees. We had like 13-mile-an-hour winds, and the relative humidity was extremely high. When we go out on these fires that are campaign fires throughout the state, we're talking 90, 100-degree days with 50-mile-an-hour winds sometimes, and RH is down into double-digit, like 11, 12s. And we see aggressive fire behavior. That day, we did not see that, and it was about 1.5 acres. So it's something that we're very concerned about, and we're working with the city and Public Works to try to improve that for everyone involved. One of the things that we're looking at is that you guys are talking about is thinning out the eucalyptus, but we're also really concerned about the ground fuels. We're concerned about the jackpots, the grasses, because all of that is what is going to start, and then it's going to go up into the trees. So some of the things that we've done to improve fire safety too for us as well, we've installed an FDC right there, which is a fire department connection. She's got her hand on it. And we have a hydrant right there. And then if you guys go up, when you go up to see the monarchs about 300 feet up, there's another hydrant. And actually on that fire that we had in June, we used that hydrant to help mitigate. There was one of the eucalyptus that we call it torching. The whole eucalyptus was on fire basically. So with that said, if you guys have any questions, I'm here to answer anything.
Yeah. I hike up here quite a bit, and I've reported down trees in several areas. Mm-hmm. And the city has sent somebody to come cut them down, but then they leave the wood there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Usually they'll buck it up, so they'll.
Up here they do, but down in the trails they don't.
They don't. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if that's something that Margot could. Okay.
You talking about the oak woodland?
Yes.
Yeah, so the oak woodland, oaks are not, the oak woodland is not the fire hazard that the eucalyptus are. And also,
Can't hear you.
You can't hear? Okay, how about that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, the oak woodland, the oaks on the north side, they are not the fire hazard that the eucalyptus are up in this area. So when a tree falls, we let it rot and decompose. It also provides wildlife habitat. So, but we do bucket up some so that it's not as much of a fire hazard.
Yeah.
So if anyone has questions about any of the things we've talked about here, we can take 4 or 5 minutes for questions. If not, we can walk down Taft to take a look at some of the erosion. I see one. Does anyone else have a question? 2, 3? Okay, we'll do it. We'll do questions. You first.
Apologize if I missed this, but what's the timeline?
You did not miss this. We did not address it. The timeline for this project is going to be phased. Right now, we're very early in the design phase for coming up with the forest management plan. And so it's probably going to be a phased 2 to 3 year project. we will not start, it won't be implemented until, what, 2024, 2025? Yeah. So these are early days. We're here to get input. Part of why we're doing these public sessions is to find out what people's priorities are. And we're coming up with 3 alternative plans for the management and the end result design of the hilltop. And we'll be bringing that to a public meeting to get your feedback and your information on.
So, so 2024, 2025, that seems like a long ways away.
Yeah.
Is there any plan to start taking out some of the most distressed of these trees in the meantime? Because I've been seeing for 5 years that these trees are not good.
Did everyone hear her question? Urgency was the question. Are we going to get some of the emergency ones down? Margot, do you want to say anything?
Okay.
The city is keeping an eye on all of the trees, especially along Jackson and Taft.
You're very handsome.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're keeping an eye on trees along the roads. And if there's some that look like they're not looking too good, we're going to remove them. So yes, we do have a plan to, if ones look like it's an emergency, we're definitely going to take them out.
We're not going to not remove them if they need to be, but in terms of a large scale mobilization of resources and mass removal, that'll come later. Someone over, what's your question?
I was just curious. I mean, it's clear that these are owned by development company and condos, and I know we're not talking about this land, but just curious, who owns that part of the land? It seems like there's some eucalyptuses on that, right?
That looks like 535 Pierce.
This one right here, because there's a line between it and the Pierce. Is this the same land?
Yeah, I think that is the open space of 535 Pierce.
Open space that's filled with eucalyptus, but
For Margot, could you tell us about the wood source for the benches and the steps?
the question was, can you tell us about the wood source for the benches and the steps?
Eucalyptus. Yes, those were from a previous project 4 years ago for our trails and access improvements project when this wheelchair path was built. Some eucalyptus were felled and they were made into benches, steps you'll see down here, and then barriers for the turnaround.
And one of the comments that came up in the public session was, what are we doing about carbon sequestration? What are we doing? I mean, look, this is a lot of wood. The city's already had a planer come in from Bay Area Redwood to plane the wood to use to build retaining walls and to reuse on site. And we're looking at, chipping and compost and reuse of that wood as best as we can to sink that back into this site. It is not allelopathic, a couple of rains and the chips are fine. One of the things that is commonly misunderstood is that these eucalyptus don't suppress plant growth nearby through chemicals. It's really the leaf litter. Their leaves do not decompose. As we walk around, look on the ground, they just stay there and they smother everything. You'll see toyons. Some California native plants can kind of push their way through and don't seem to care. You'll see toyons growing right next to eucalyptus, some baby oaks coming up, but we are looking at ways to reuse the trees that have to come down. So.
On this map, I guess we're going to talk about it later, but the green area says Albany easement, City of Albany easement, and then there's lots shown from prior subdivision. So I'm wondering why those haven't been vacated or removed. And then to the west, there's development company, and I'm wondering if they have a conservation easement or if there are plans to maybe add to the public owned. But I also wonder why it's an easement and not public ownership.
The question was about the map and the plot lines that are shown as development units on the map, and whether or not those are going to be developed, and if the easement, why the easement is an easement and not just conservation land. Did I get that right?
Yeah, and I had a third question
Oh.
on the development land to the west.
And
but
development
yeah,
land to the west.
yeah.
This is a question for our planning department actually, so I will forward your question to Jeff Bond, who's our community development director. And actually, if you could email that question to the Eucalyptus Project email address, that would be great.
But it's not going to get developed, right? It's just an artifact, I'm guessing.
Yeah, well, I'm not the expert on that too, but yeah, that's there. There's a long history, which you guys, a lot of people probably know more than I do, so I won't speak to it. But that's not on the table. And but what I grabbed the microphone for is just to add that, from our understanding and experience of working with the city, is that all of these owners are very interested in being partners. They're not sure what that means yet, and we can get this a little bit, but there's potential funding sources. Public-private partnerships for funding are complicated, but there's definitely an interest. Technology. It sounded really loud to me.
Because it was pointing at you.
Yeah. So that's an unknown piece that is definitely on our radar of, okay, this is why we brought up this map, is to say that's one of the complicating factors. It's not like we have the Albany town has complete ownership over everything. We don't. The eucalyptus forest crosses these boundaries, and it makes things complicated to come up with a comprehensive plan, because they remove trees in one location. It's not like those other trees are immune to whatever you just did next to them, even though they're different properties. So we're aware of that. Don't have the answers of how to work with the property owners, other than I think that there's economy of scale. We're talking about maybe goats in the future and having them move across. That's an option too. So on our radar.
Yeah.
I recognize the dire nature of this living right here with fire bus. But I'm wondering how it would look in the end. You mentioned that it's originally a grass-covered hill. And generally speaking, for fire safety, most grass-covered hills, I know, get a haircut, one or two times during the fire season, which is kind of a loss aesthetically in terms of bird environment. And I'm wondering if there are native planting solutions to that.
Let's defer it to
Where's the question, for those of you who couldn't hear it, was about what sort of native plant typologies, or what the vision is for what the hill will look like in the end, and how can we keep that as natural as possible for bird habitat while still doing adequate fire management. I'm going to defer the answer to that until we're up looking at the native plantings, and Erin from Nomad Ecology will be talking a little bit about what we can bring onto the hill and what that might look like. And just as a point, we're not going to be able to recreate the ecosystem, pre-settlement. We're going to be dealing with invasive plants. We're not, right now, prescribed burns or cultural burns in this environment are not a good idea. So, it's going to be a long range, long vision shift that we're trying to start with this project. But we'll let Erin speak to that more later.
There were a number of trees that came down from the high windstorms this year, and I wonder if anyone examined those eucalyptus trees to see if they did have signs of stress before they came down. So I really wonder how predictive these signs of stress are on what eucalyptus tree
Falls. The question was, some of the eucalyptus that fell down in the high windstorms this year, the question was, were those examined for signs of stress, water stress, pathogen? Were they analyzed as to, were we able to use the studies to predict which ones were going to fall down? Applied science question, basically.
Well, basically all of the eucalyptus have problems, structural, drought. So no, we did not do that. But we can keep an eye on the trees, and if we see certain signs, I go around with our arborist and check and see if this tree looks like it's about to fall, then we can do something about it. But one thing you'll see if we walk down here and you look up along the slope, there are trees there that are leaning, and you can see some of them, the roots are, soil's eroding from under the roots. So those are signs, definitely.
Apologies. Just as an add-on, there are very detailed arborist reports on the website that are on the back of that handout you got with the links, and you may have already read through all of them. But essentially, there's like one eucalyptus tree up here that seems healthy enough to stay permanently, and it's got an asterisk and a star and it's in bold, but pretty much every tree up here is under duress of 1 to 5 varieties. And that's part of the urgency that a lot of the property owners are feeling.
We're going to visit that tree.
No.
258.
Yeah.
It is 258.
It is tree 258.
Which actually is a good segue to mention. So you'll see the arborist tags on trees with numbers. And then these reports do, based on every tree, have kind of a history, and they've kind of been revisited, and some of them are using ultrasonic sounding. So some of these have very much been studied. But it's all predictive. I mean, you can't say, look at this tree and say when it's going to fall. So they look at, like, is it probable in the next 5 years that something will happen? And then also compounding. So if you remove every tree except for this perfect tree right there, that perfect tree is now susceptible to wind, and it's not perfect anymore. So that's why it's just kind of compounding. And at the end of the day, it's like these eucalyptus, it's not the right place for them. They're hurting.
What do the different colors mean, the tags?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Maybe the color they had before they ran out of the other tape. I don't know.
Yeah.
Some are red, some are yellow.
Yeah. Well, we did basically one color was remove, another was prune, and another color were trees in the monarch where monarchs overwinter. But basically, when it comes down to it, all of the trees have problems.
Just got one other question.
Actually, it's in between 12:35 and 12:40, and if you've got additional questions, if you can hold them for the next Q&A or email them to the email address on that handout, that would be fantastic. But right now, what we'd like to do is thank the fire department. Thank you for coming, thank you for being here, and thank you for your work. And then we're gonna kind of circle up and walk past that beautiful fire truck just down Taft a little ways. Margot can lead the way. I will hand her the microphone. But we're just going to look at some of the soil, the rock, and the eucalyptus and what's happening with soil stability there. And I may have Erin, who I've lost. There you are. Have Erin talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the hillside.
The first thing I'd like you to notice is the retaining wall here. This is eucalyptus that we had milled. So we had trees cut down, some trees that were dead or dying, and we had a portable milling company come in and mill 2x6 material for us. And our urban tilth crew came in and they built this wall with the help of Public Works maintenance crews. And the good thing about eucalyptus is that the lumber, it's so dense, it doesn't rot easily. So it'll make it's made a really good retaining wall, keeping the rocks and soil from sliding down, and hopefully it will last a long time. So, and now if you look up and see eucalyptus along the edge here, there's several that you can see some roots that are soil's starting to erode underneath them. And the ones here aren't as much of a concern. There is a road here, that is a problem, but we're more worried about trees down where the houses are, and the same with along Jackson. So those are the trees that we want to keep an eye on, and especially if we see, like here, I see a dead tree up here. Certain branches that are overhanging, and I actually think there's some trees along Jackson that seem to be worse off. They're closer, I think, to the houses, and some of them seem like they need to go pretty soon. So, okay. I think that's about all I wanted to say. Annika, do you want to?
Erin again. There you are. While we're here looking at the road cut and the erosion and the
exposed roots of the eucalyptus. There's also some native plants here that Erin can point out and talk about, and it's encouraging to see them growing right next to the eaves.
Sure, thank you, Annika. So Albany Hill is sort of a geologic island, right? It's this hill that's surrounded by lowlands, and the hill itself is sandstone. So as you're looking at it, you can see, you know, right behind Eric, you can see some of the exposed sandstone. And so it's interesting because it's well drained because it's sandstone, but it's also right on the bay, so it receives fog coming in from the Golden Gate. And then what's also really interesting about the hill is that there's a huge diversity of plants present here already. So for restoration, our approach will really be fairly passive. So you can see, like at the base of this eucalyptus here, there's a toyon, which is a native shrub, small tree. Behind us here, that's a coast live oak, which is also native. And so as you look around in the understory, you can see lots of small trees and shrubs. All along that cliff, as we're walking down, there were ferns. So our restoration approach will really be, you know, removing the select trees and then allowing the understory that's already present to grow, often with protecting it, maybe with caging, because there's herbivory by, you know, turkeys scratching around the base and deer eating the top. There's plant material all over the mountain, so we'll be doing collecting it and propagating it and outplanting. But again, it's really exciting because there's so much here that we can draw from, that we don't have to bring in plants from all over. We can collect stuff here, grow it out, and then plant it. And then addressing the question about, you know, the fire chief spoke about controlling grassland and making sure it doesn't start fires that go into the crown. Sort of the end goal for the mountain or the hill will be a mix of grassland and oak woodland and shrubland. And the grassland will likely be how it is now, like mostly dominated by non-native annual grasses, but with islands of natives. So I'm picturing the management will be select mowing around native plants to protect them, because the timing really is annual grasses that are non-native grow earlier in the spring and they're tall, and those are the fuel hazard. Those are like the 3 feet tall wild oats that you see. That's the fuel hazard. And then the native plants are usually later in the summer, you know, like asters and lower shrubs that bloom in the summer. So you don't want to mow everything in May because you want to allow the natives to go to seed. So I'm picturing islands of natives that are, you know, weed whacked around to preserve them, and then areas of larger annual grasses that need to be mowed to protect them from fuel danger. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
The eucalyptus are an important source of nectar for pollinators in the winter, and I'm wondering what will be here for, I mean, assuming if there aren't any eucalyptus.
Yeah.
Would be.
So one thing I think that's important to mention now is there will always be eucalyptus on Albany Hill, unless, I mean, because what we're looking at now is really just management of the top of the hill and not management of the whole hill. The other thing that Stu will talk about is there is a grove that is very important for monarchs, and then there are trees around that create a windbreak. So there will always be some eucalyptus to provide nectar, and we're just talking about removal of a lot of them. And then we'll think about that when we're choosing the plant palette for restoration, sort of what things we can plant and protect that are already on the hill that will continue to provide nectar sources throughout the year, and flowering and other habitat. So yeah, we're really looking into a diversity of plants, a diversity of habitats that will do well here to provide all sorts of nectar plants, host plants, habitat for our animals and birds.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the question was if all the eucalyptus are important in the winter for nectar, and so if they're all removed, what will replace that nectar source? That was the question. Did you have a question?
I do.
Yeah.
And I ask it every time.
The oxalis.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know that it's everywhere, and there hasn't been a solution yet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so she's asking about the oxalis, which is the Bermuda buttercup, which is a weed. Probably everyone's familiar with it. It has those little yellow flowers, and you can already see it starting to germinate and grow all over the hill. And it's here. I think, another thing about our passive restoration approach is trying to minimize disturbance as best we can. You know, Bermuda grass is everywhere, but weeds are.
This way in between the cars or off the actual sidewalk. They have a clear lane.
We good? So in terms of invasive weed control and prevention, I think what will be important is to minimize disturbance as much as possible. So the rest, again, we're going back to passive restoration and not, you know, like large scale regrading or anything. And I think that would be, in terms of invasive weed spread, disturbance and moving of soil will move things around. Another thing that I think will be important is when we remove the eucalyptus and we chipping them and having mulch on site. I've been involved in other restoration projects where the eucalyptus wood chips end up being very important for suppressing weeds. So you don't just remove eucalyptus and then have a bunch of weeds come right in. And then I think too, it will be the native planting areas will require maintenance, and they do now, and they will continue. So I'm hopeful that the project won't make the invasive weed problem worse, and it might, you know, as we know, there's Bermuda buttercup everywhere, and I don't expect this project to be able to eradicate it.
Group that I went through the past years, when there's a single one, you go down and get the bulbs and keep the single multiply. And I've watched that. It just
Yeah.
doesn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's, the invasive weeds are a huge concern. Yeah.
Are there strategies for like weed whacking down the grasses, particularly up towards the oats early in the year that allow the native grasses to proliferate? And if so, like what time of year is best, and how far down or how high do you weed whack?
That's a good question, and yes, mowing is used very commonly for control of annual grasses and to help native plants succeed in those areas. So the timing is often, you know, before the annual grasses set seed and drop their seed, because they're annual, so they're just growing each year from the seeds in the seed bank. So if you can mow and try to reduce the seeds that are in the seed bank, that reduces what comes up year after year. And then also they compete by growing over the native vegetation you want. So by mowing, you reduce the sort of cover and competition above ground for water, etc.
You mentioned the oats grow faster early. Is that is like a certain time of year, like March or something, where you do the first weed whack?
If you mow too early, this might be getting into the weeds. But if you mow too early, just more grow. So it's sort of letting it fill out and then mowing. So.
And after that question, it's 12:50.
Yeah.
And so we can turn around and walk back up to the demonstration native plant garden. That will be, this is a very nice segue.
Yeah.
To talking about current native plant efforts already happening on the hill and getting you guys some search images for what's around.
Okay, so can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
All right, so what you are looking at right now is a native plant restoration area. And when this pathway was built 4 years ago as part of a trails and access improvement project by the city, some eucalyptus, a few eucalyptus were removed on this slope behind me. And then the hillside was scraped to install this concrete pathway. And so previously we had collected seeds from native plants growing on the hill, and we had them propagated at local native plant nurseries. And then we planted them all along the slope and also in other areas on the hill where the project had created bare soil. And we have labels for some of these plants, not all of them, but you'll see things like California sagebrush, we've got sticky monkey flower, we've got some native bunch grasses behind me, we've got something called gum plant, and coyote mint, and these are all good for pollinators, birds, and other wildlife, including deer who actually munch on the monkey flowers, but they don't kill them. They just munch on them and kind of prune them a little, and they actually end up growing better. And we continue to plant natives in this area each year, and we're also getting sprouts from seeds from the plants that we planted coming up. So if you look, you'll see lots of little baby native plants all along the slope here. And this area, so we do the planting with a group called Urban Tilth, and the city has a contract with Urban Tilth to do work on the hill and creeks in Albany. So Urban Tilth is a nonprofit based in Richmond that teaches local residents about the relationships between natural ecosystems, food, health, and justice, and they directly engage community members in activities to improve urban environments. And they have a watersheds stewardship crew who we work with once or twice a week to remove invasive plants. We do mowing of the grasslands, pruning vegetation, planting natives, repairing trails, and other projects, including installing the retaining walls that you saw back there. So yeah, Urban Tilth, they help us with all the work on the hill, on city property, from the crest all the way down to the creek. And we actually also work along Codornices Creek as well. One thing I want to mention that's in the handout is that we have an online Albany Hill field guide to native plants and animals. It's coming out very soon. And with funding from a Coastal Conservancy Wildfire Resilience Grant, the city created a habitat restoration intern program. And interns are doing activities to increase our understanding of plant and animal communities on the hill, and also helping us restore ecosystems on the hill. And our first intern, Isabel, this past summer, she created this first edition of the field guide, and it has information and photos on 18 plants and animals. And we worked with our partners at Segorite and Confederated Villages of Lishan to get Chochenyo names for some of these. And it's meant to be a living document with future interns adding more plants and animals in the future. The guide also has information about Albany Hill, its cultural significance, and resources for learning more about the hill. And when it comes out, hopefully in a week or two, we'll post information on the e-news. We'll probably send an email to you folks about it. And the idea is that you can take it as you walk along Albany Hill and look at various things, see where the different native plants are and animals and monarchs. So, yeah. Let's see. Aaron, or should we hand it over to Dana? Or do you want to do some more?
I think I've said everything.
Ah, you say everything?
Yeah, I'll repeat that. So Annika was pointing out the native plants that are present in the understory, mostly oaks. You can see there's a young coastline oak there with shiny green leaves, and over there it's glistening. There's also a lot of toyon. So the toyon has the red berries. So those are most of the shrubs you see this time of year. And there's a monarch. Okay.
How about poison oak?
Oh yes, there's a lot of poison oak. Thanks for bringing that up. This time of year it's dropped its leaves, so a lot of these woody stems that you see off the side of the trail is poison oak. And we've had a few questions about controlling poison oak to enhance visitor use on the hill. And I think in a lot of places we'll leave poison oak be. It's a great plant for keeping people on the trails instead of going onto the habitat. It also provides habitat for birds because it's shrubby and low, and insects, animals don't get poison oak, so they use it as habitat. So it won't be, we won't be, I don't think, actively promoting its spread or propagating or anything, but control of poison oak on the hill as a whole is not a goal of the project.
Its roots are good for holding the hillside.
That's true, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, because I heard folks talking about erosion as we were walking up, and concerns about just stability on the hill, and that is definitely something we'll consider in terms of just stabilization after work is done, planting of native grasses, which have really deep roots and are great for holding soil, things like poison oak and other trees and shrubs that hold the soil. So that's definitely on our radar as a concern, slope stability, and the plan will address that.
Okay, can people hear me?
Yes.
Great. Is everybody here? Is everybody here? Okay. So this is actually one of your best opportunities to get a good picture of monarchs with your cell phone, because they're really close. So make sure you don't miss the opportunity. Okay. Okay. So I guess the question is, what are they doing here? Why are they here? So I'm going to first talk about the overall western monarch migration. So these butterflies were born somewhere from the Coast Ranges, Sierra Nevada, the Great Basin, up into Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. They come to the California coast to spend the winter. What they're looking for is a place that's not too hot, not too cold, rarely freezes, and they find those general conditions right along the California coast. They also are looking for trees to roost in, and we have provided them with many, many opportunities for roost trees by having all these eucalyptus groves that were planted for various reasons, as windbreaks, as woodlots, to protect against the sound of the explosives plant, etc. And the monarchs used to go, this is to the best of our understanding, they used to overwinter on the Monterey Peninsula, where you have a pine oak forest, a native pine oak forest that covers tens of thousands of acres. Down near Cambria, which is the southern Monterey pine grove, and then maybe around Año Nuevo, where there's the third Monterey pine grove. Otherwise, they would not have been right along the coast, except maybe a little sliver of Sonoma County where the redwoods and Douglas fir come down to the ocean. So we have given them, like this, many, many more opportunities for overwintering by our spreading of eucalyptus. So they come to California, they're trying to kind of hunker down for the winter. So they're in what we call diapause, which means their reproductive organs are not developing. So they're shut down for the overwintering season. Now, they find these groves of trees. To me, having studied this for decades, they explore virtually every grove of trees above a certain size along the California coast. Some monarchs encounter it. So They come, they're looking for a place to rest. They pick a tree that seems suitable at the time. And then the presence of monarchs at a site attracts more monarchs. They're very social that way. So they can, early in the season, they can be very, very spread out across hundreds of sites. Then we get the first storms of the year. The winds get high winds, get maybe colder temperatures. They leave certain groves where it's too windy for them. And then they fly around and they find the places where the monarchs stuck around, because that's the indicator that's a good place to be a monarch butterfly. So a big prominent eucalyptus forest like Albany Hill here is going to attract monarchs that are passing by. Now, why are they here in particular? What are their criteria for staying in a tree and clustering? So probably the single most important factor is wind. They're looking for a wind-sheltered spot. The other criteria is sunshine. They like it being a sunny spot. So they're basically looking for a sunny, wind-sheltered microclimate nook. Now, so you might say this looks like it's pretty wind exposed up here on the top of the hill. And yes, indeed, it is. We can talk about the details of that. So when we get the first big storms of the season, they leave here. So they'll be up here for maybe weeks on end, you know, going from tree to tree. Sometimes they'll cluster here, sometimes they'll cluster there. There's kind of some random chance to the whole thing. But then we get like a really major storm and it's like too windy up here for them. They take off down the hill into that gully over there, where we have really strong protection from the hill itself, but also there's all these trees down to Pierce that are providing wind shelter. And even the high rises are providing some wind shelter for them too. So we get this dynamic of start off the season up here, the weather closes in, they go down there. Now, if we get one of those long midwinter drought, dry periods when it's nice and warm, they'll start making their way back up here again, but then they'll duck back down. So a big issue here is that the place where they wait out the storms, that's not city property. So we're dealing with these property boundaries that make it really difficult to manage the monarchs. So in terms of taking them into consideration with managing the forest here, there's going to be a zone up here where we're retaining most of the trees that create the windbreak. So a really good example of the kind of vulnerability we talk about is that if you look down there, you see that big gap. That's where the infamous cross used to be. That is facing due southeast. Guess where the strongest winds come when storms come in? It's from the southeast. So these monarchs right here are going to get quite a blast of wind, and they're going to leave at some point. But if we can maintain enough of the trees around here for that inner wind shelter, then this place will not change that much from a monarch's perspective. And there's plenty of other trees that can be removed. But in this area, we're going to really be considering it almost tree by tree. And the key is that we need to be able to maintain rows of trees like that over on this side, we're pretty much on the boundary of the city property, so nothing's going to happen over there for now. And then as we go farther down here, so I guess I just thought of this today as it's going to be like a monarch mohawk on Albany Hill, where there's going to be this group of trees up here on the top that are going to be maintained and managed for monarchs, and then maybe even, I haven't talked with my colleagues about this, planting like a few more to maybe fill in a gap like that. So that's our thought process for the monarchs up here. And again, we don't have authority over where they go to when the weather really kicks in. I don't know, I guess I can take some questions here.
Okay. We heard earlier that the trees are not in good condition. What happens then?
Well, that's a really good question. The trees were in really, really bad condition. Oh, the question was, what about the condition of the trees? They're in really bad shape. Well, they're pretty resilient provided we get the occasional wet year. So at the end of 2022, they were looking really, really sad. But then we had a nice wet year, and you can see how they're pushing out new growth. So by having a better managed forest with maybe thinning out some of the understory, the reduced competition, we can help maintain the health of the individual trees.
If you get the consensus to plant eucalyptus, is there a species that's more adapted to this environment than do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Are there other species of eucalyptus, should we choose to plant them, that are better adapted to a dry environment? And the answer is yes. We're actually working with a species, red ironbark, down in Santa Barbara County, which is way too far south for the blue gums. So there was like a massive die-off from the drought at one of the major sites in California. So we're rebuilding the wind shelter using red ironbark. So we have a good list of trees. It's going to be very, very selective, but we're going to consider it. How many years have they been coming here? Definitely since the 80s, maybe earlier.
Did everyone hear that answer? Sounds like it. Okay,
And
good.
at least since 1975, the records were kept at the Department of Fish and Games, and it was kept by Don Neal, who was at the Oakland Museum.
So you're saying known since 1975 on the Hill?
That's when the records show it.
Okay, sounds
What's the
good.
lifespan of a monarch?
Okay, what's the lifespan of a monarch? Okay, depends which generation. So these guys might live about 6 months. So they were born, their eggs were laid maybe in August, somewhere out east of here. And then they come here, they spend the winter, and then in like February, they go into a mating frenzy. And then the females fly off looking for the newly emerging milkweed. So then they lay eggs and then those females die. The next generation develops and they'll like colonize maybe the Sierra Nevada and get out into the Great Basin by June. Then they lay their eggs on the milkweeds and then they die. And there's another generation that kind of fills out the full range of the butter. And these generations are like 6 weeks long. The individual monarch adult might only live a few weeks. And they just pump out eggs. A female monarch can lay like 400 eggs over the course of her brief life. And then when it gets to be like late August, early September, the days are getting shorter. So there's a photoperiod Q that triggers a hormonal response that stops their reproductive development and they become the migratory generation. And then they fly towards the coast somehow, with them. Monarch navigation is still people are studying it. It's really quite sophisticated. They have some magnetic stuff. They can keep track of where the sun is in the sky, and they can do a directional heading and kind of work with the winds. Because this little butterfly, these guys have to kind of glide, really long way to get here.
Does that generation live longer?
What?
Does the migratory
Yeah, that's the one that lives about 6 months. If you're not pumping out eggs and reproducing, you got lots of energy and nutrients. Oh boy, so many. Okay. No.
I live at 545 Pierce, and my understanding is that some of the respite growth is on our property. And I'm wondering if the city is encouraging the homeowners to do something to protect the monarchs and also concerned about fire. So does the city have recommendations?
Out of this plan, there'll be some, and I think more. Oh, yes. So the question was specifically about the property owner here that owns the monarch kind of grove down below. Is there any plans about management specifically for those eucalyptus, even though they're not on city property? So part of this, and fire, because it's related to fire. Absolutely. So part of this plan, the idea is that there'll be lessons learned or ways we think about things that can be used specifically down there. And my understanding is not just your property, but it's other properties. I think everyone wants to be smart about it. So that's kind of the general answer. I think then it comes down to the actionable items, like how much can we actually do together as a group. That'll be determined. Yes.
So now that the monarchs are used to coming here, so what about other type of trees other than eucalyptus that might give them the same kind of shelter and sun?
Yeah, we've been through that for decades. There's like very few evergreen trees that will grow in an environment like this that get tall enough. We did a thought piece, maybe we can post on the city website, talking about like we need to use eucalyptus if we want to. We need to manage eucalyptus if we want to keep the California monarch phenomenon going. And I think the key line is that the monarchs made their choice and we have to work with it and honor it, because there really is not a suitable native tree in a lot of areas that provides the same structure as eucalyptus.
Maybe a couple more questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do the monarchs feed while they're here, or they spend the entire time?
Okay, so they will get nectar while they're here. They fuel their migration on flowers out on the migratory path. They actually can make it through the winter without feeding on nectar, but they just lose more of their fat reserves and they're in less good condition when they're ready to migrate. But providing nectar for them is actually an important, especially in the fall when they show up. We want monarchs to stick around on a site so they attract more monarchs. So think about it, every monarch hour on a site means you have a bigger chance of getting another monarch showing up. And then they get there. Then in January, the ukes come into bloom, and it's kind of fat city for them.
They're not attracted to oaks?
Not as a nectar source.
Maybe last question.
Yeah. In the same way that the monarchs found an alternative habitat here when their habitat further south went away, I know you've studied possible replacement trees for the site and not found good candidates, but in the same way that the monarchs found an alternative habitat, have you studied other habitats existing in the area that they might find?
Okay, so I think I've worked at almost every East Bay monarch site.
No, I mean past the East Bay, 100 miles, 150, far.
They're already occupying the habitats up and down the coast up to Gualala historically.
Okay, so they're good in those habitats.
Yeah.
So they could go further.
Yeah, they could, but they could just like, hey, this place looks good, and as long as there's other monarchs here and it's not too windy, not too cold.
And they are.
So just in terms of time, we do have more time, probably some more questions, but let me mention a few things, and let me take that from you so you don't have to stand here. Yeah. There are probably more monarch questions, so don't go too far. Now that we're here, we've had kind of the overall presentation. I think this is a good spot to bring up for us as kind of the ones tasked with coming up with an actionable plan, that we're kind of sitting at the hardest part of the whole project. I think everything else you guys heard is eucalyptus trouble, we need to get rid of them. We have an idea of what habitats, there's some details in there, certainly in management we got to figure out. But boy, there's, in one of the studies I mentioned the monarch conundrum, and that's really what we're at, is Stu knows a lot about monarchs, and he's doing a good job of explaining to all of us here, including our team, how they're using the site. We understand how eucalyptus, how we need to manage those, and there's this complete overlap, which is, for our work, is so unusual, where we have two things that are somewhat completely opposed. And they're locally right here, which is good, spatially segregated, so this problem isn't necessarily the whole hill, but it's really, this is the focal point and downhill. And so we need to figure out this detail, and Stu mentioned like tree by tree. It very well could be a tree by tree element. But I think it's always good for us to think about, it's also, we're not dealing with a static system. For those who've lived here a long time, Annika talked about what happened 100 years ago. It's constantly changing. I've been working on the hill for a very short time, about 5 or 10 years, and I've seen change. And then we're gonna do a big project which is gonna implement a lot of change when we remove a lot of eucalyptus. And it's just that kind of, we're always snapshots in the time and trying to figure out, well, where are we headed, what trajectory, how are the monarchs gonna change over time and wanna use this site. So I find it exciting, a little bit daunting. I don't have the answer to this question here. We'll have to keep working on that, and we're going to have more public meetings. As we have ideas, we'll present them and just kind of get the reaction of the group. Some things we haven't thought about? Yes, real quick. So there was about barn owls. Is that? Yeah. So actually, we maybe can even have a quick talk about birds. That was also on the agenda, so we can do that here in a second if Dana can do that. But while we're up here, Stu actually mentioned this idea aesthetically of what this would look like up here, and it's something I haven't brought up in the last meeting or today, but I did in the city council meeting. Is one of the considerations is very much the aesthetics of the hill. It's not the driver, but it's something we need to think about. And I think about it in two different ways. One is the aesthetics when we're up here. We're going to have great views in some areas where we don't right now, and how those will be, and maybe that drives some micro decisions in there, but we should think about that. But I think probably for most of us who live around here, we don't come up to the top of the hill as much as we experience it in our daily lives, driving or shopping or living. And the aesthetics of what this hill is going to look like, because the silhouette of this hill is very iconic, and it's the eucalyptus crown that we're seeing. And you can even see now you're going to leave and you're going to see, wow, it's wispy at the top when I'm looking around town, and that's just because we're seeing that die off. So and something we'll definitely look at is, what if we just removed all these eucalyptus here? What will it look like around, and what will look like there? And there's going to be changes. Definitely we'll see a difference, but it's something I think we should think about is, well, what is that look, the iconic look of the hill going to be over time? And we have to bring up, it's not that we're going to see bare earth in a lot of locations, because as you've noticed, we have a lot of oaks and toyon that are growing, and so it's, we have, these trees aren't the tallest eucalyptus, 50 feet maybe 100. The oaks will go down to 30 feet, so there'll be a drop. But I just wanted to bring up the aesthetics too. This I think is an important piece we haven't talked about.
So we have a really detailed three-dimensional map of the forest here. We flew, it's called LiDAR. It's a drone that goes over and it's shooting down laser beams. And since it's a small area, we could shoot down on the order of 50 points per square meter, which gives us an incredible level of detail and lets us pick out individual trees. So we're going to be able to run through various scenarios and identify trees that have to come out for various reasons, ones we want to retain, ones that need to be retained, and we'll be able to run through and we'll be able to take a look at what it might look like.
And let's do a quick, because I think it's worth it, a bird discussion from Dana, who works at Nomad as well. Where did Dana go? Oh, there you go.
Sorry, distracted by monarchs.
Yeah. Hold that so I don't squeal. So we've had a lot of questions about birds, species, and how it'll change from how birds are using the site now to potentially how they'll use it in the future. So I think that's generally generally the intent of what Dana can talk about.
Yeah, hi. So like Aaron was saying with the plant habitat and how if we can remove some of the eucalyptus in some of the areas and then sort of replace it with other kinds of vegetation, that will definitely affect the birds that you'll see out here also, because really everything is bird habitat. It doesn't matter what it is. Some species of bird will use it for certain. And so if we're able to provide more different kinds of habitats there, so a little bit of grassland, a little bit of scrub, and even like sort of a mix of those things, you're going to get other birds that are going to come to the hill, and they're going to take a look at that and think, oh great, it's not just eucalyptus. This is something else that I can live in. And this place is really locally very sort of special and important for those bird species, for all these bird species, because it's this giant hill that sticks up out of the ground. It's got all this elevation, and it's covered in all of these trees it is completely unlike what is, if you go, 1,000 feet that way or 1,000 feet that way. It's completely different. And so you'll wind up with all of these birds that some of them are resident here. They'll live here all year long. You'll get a lot of times you'll see up here, you'll probably see little birds, a little brown bird with a black head. It's called a dark-eyed junco. Little groups of them hopping around on the ground. They're here all year round. You'll get all kinds of other birds they just live here. It's their whole place that they live. But birds obviously are migratory, and a lot of people have probably heard of the Pacific Flyway. Birds flying all up and down the coast of California, and so you come here at different times of year, you'll see totally different birds. And so this place will attract a lot of those migrants that will come here. They'll kind of concentrate here. It gives them the cover that they need. So it winds up being really important habitat for multiple species and also multiple parts of those species' life cycles. And so if we can diversify those habitats a little bit, we can open that up to try to hopefully get more bird species that maybe can come here and make use of this habitat. And so I know there was a question about the barn owls for sure. So there could certainly be barn owls up in these trees. Definitely, I know I've seen if you look at if you're familiar with iNaturalist or eBird, and probably I'd imagine that a lot of you I checked iNaturalist and eBird for this whole area, and I imagine that probably a fair number of the people in this audience right now, I was looking at your records that you entered. So thank you for that. There's great horned owls out here, red-tailed hawks, red-shouldered hawks, Cooper's hawks. Those are kind of the larger raptors, and then all kinds of other smaller perching birds. Us affecting the slope down over there, for better or for worse, there's still going to be an enormous amount of structure for those birds down there, and a lot of those species they are sort of similar to the monarchs. They're just looking for the tallest thing in the area. And so if you remove a little bit of this structure, they'll just move to the next tallest tree down, and that's where they'll nest instead. So in a lot of cases, you know, what we're looking at with all of this down here, there's still going to be habitat for a lot of those larger bird species, those big hawks, those owls, that, you know, people really think about and really want to see. So that's, but it really is, it's a lot about just trying to get a little bit more diversity on the hill and just kind of open it up for those other species. Yeah.
Well, you talk about that there would be taller trees, but I think the taller trees would be down in the private areas down there, provide nesting habitat. Also very important, I think, is the understory.
Yeah.
I know the fire department is here by ladders, going up the brush. You know, that is habitat for nesting, is cover habitat for smaller birds, for ground nesting birds, mid-level nesting birds. So all that is really important. I think we're going to see maybe a drastic change in the mix of birds, and also the abundance.
Yeah, and that is a really good point. And I think that's why, you know, we're going to be looking at keeping a lot of those toy-ons and things like that are, you know, that provide exactly that kind of cover that you're looking for those birds that want to be further down, either on the ground or sort of mid-canopy, sort of like spotted towhees, California towhees, those kind of species. And so, yeah, you know, we're not looking at absolutely making it bare ground underneath these eucalyptus. You know, there's going to be some retention of those things that are providing that sort of mid-level structure. You know, we certainly would want to keep some of that for sure.
And even some of the non-native shrubby species, like
Pyracantha.
Can we address a little bit of that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
You know, provide loveberries.
Expert landscape architect, just as a preface to that. We've gotten a lot of comments about concerns about bird habitat and making sure we have the right structure to support different life cycles and migrations, and we are taking that into account. That's part of why Nomad is on the design team. Also, I want to call back to Aaron's previous comments about the oak woodland and the riparian areas. Those are not part of the fire hazard concern, and with the removal of the eucalyptus and the oaks growing, us getting oaks and more native plants on the site, we can provide the mid-story shrub and the ground cover for species and for habitat without violating the fire concerns, and we'll be working with the fire department on that to make sure that all those needs are met. The big problem right now is mid-story shrubs that touch all of this peeling bark and leaf litter and eucalyptus leaves that come down to the base of the tree, with a more structured oak woodland forest where you've got oaks and you've got shrubs. That isn't as much of a fire ladder risk. So our hope is that this project is actually going to improve habitat for the birds and provide more shelter and food sources and diversity for them. So we're looking at all of that. And a reminder, Nat over there has handouts with the email address. So, and we really encourage you to, if you have questions, you have concerns, please get it in writing so we've got a record of that, and then that allows us to bring that to the next design level and make sure we're taking that into account. So I'll hand it back to you, Dana, for more bird questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have two questions. One is, by opening up the oaks and having more meadow, will there be more food sources for birds? And also, these oaks that are small now, will they become mature or will they not survive if the eucalyptus are taken down?
So I would say, as far as adding the, oh yeah, so she was asking of if we're adding in grassland and kind of other habitats, will there still be sort of food sources for birds? And then second part was as far as the oaks that are growing in down here, if they'll sort of make it through the eucalyptus removal process. So what I would say regarding the grassland and the other stuff that we'd want to put in, it would be a different kind of food. You know, it's like it would be. Now you would have like grass seeds, or seeds from these native plants that we're putting in that may attract other species that would be other species. And actually, to diverge off of birds a little bit and just into pollinators, just other general pollinators. Diversifying the plant palette up here would actually, it would help out, it would benefit the pollinators a lot too, and not just the monarchs. You know, there's, if you've ever been up here at other various times of year, you'll see there are a fair number of other butterflies here that are not necessarily monarchs. There are swallowtails and red admirals and buckeyes, a bunch of other kinds of butterflies. And so there, when you diversify that plant palette, it gives them other sources of food. And then on top of regarding the oaks, that might be more a question for Aaron. I don't know. Do you? Yeah.
So the question was about how large the oaks will get once you remove the eucalyptus. And you know, it's well-drained sandstone. If you go to the north side where there isn't ukes, even the oak trees there aren't that big. You know, they're small trees with a few large ones. So my thought is that this will never be like a huge mature oak woodland. It will be smaller oaks with grasses and shrubs, just because of the dryness of the soil and the exposure and what we're seeing. You know, if there was a few huge oaks that we could point to and say, oh yeah, the others will become like that, but you don't see that up here, so it suggests to me that that is not what we'll see, and so that we're not counting on that.
We've heard that the gaps in trees over there can be a problem for the windbreak. That eucalyptus is special for the monarchs to roost on, but the rest of it may be more just a windbreak, and that there were some other species that were identified, I forget what it was, that grows big and is a good windbreak. Do you see, but we've also heard that a lot of the hill is going to be grassland and that's the plan, and then a few other little things, but do you see part of the plan also being growing this alternative to eucalyptus big windbreak tree, like over there, for example, or other places?
That's, I think, what the team will discuss, what the windbreak needs are, and then what native plants could provide that, and what we think will do well in that location. And if it comes down to that we need a windbreak and there's no suitable natives that will provide that windbreak, then yeah, I think it sounds like we will be discussing use of other species, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. But it sounds like that's what we will be discussing as a team. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of you guys talk about the water regime of the eucalyptus and how that'll change when the ukes are gone, and what water will be available for the native plants.
Yeah, so eucalyptus use a lot of water, and so I've been on projects where we remove eucalyptus and all of a sudden there's a lot more water available. So it could be that the oaks grow larger and are able to when the eucalyptus are gone, because they can get more water now that they're not competing with the eucalyptus for it. And oaks also have very deep roots, so they can tap deep down into the groundwater, just like eucalyptus can. But again, eucalyptus are just very competitive, so we might see that more water is available once the ukes come out.
Over on the southwest meadow, there's well over a dozen, possibly 2 dozen volunteer wildflowers that were in the seed bank that emerged, as I understand it, on account of mowing. I wonder if the same might not be possible. Don't you think it might be plausible that the eastern meadow might also reveal some interesting stuff as we work with it? And one editorial comment on my book. I hope we aren't setting the mowing schedule for these meadows today, as far as whether much of the mowings might actually be a benefit. I'd like us to study that before we say it's good or bad.
Yeah.
What do you think about the seeds that are clearly already in the ground and that are doing okay when we give them some light and don't overshadow them with thistles and oats?
Yes, you bring up all good points. So that meadow is, sort of the gem of grassland on the mountain. There's a lot of native perennials there that bloom throughout the year into late summer and fall, so provide good habitat for butterflies and provide, seeds and nectar sources. So yes, in terms of restoration, it's great when there's a seed bank and your management activities help what's already in the seed bank grow. So we would love to do that. I'm not sure what sort of seed bank is in the areas where eucalyptus will be removed.
Yep.
So we may end up collecting seed in that meadow and then seeding elsewhere on the hill where there isn't a seed bank that we think we can manage for. But yes, ideally we would manage for the seed bank that is here. Does that answer your question? Did you have something else?
Native plant amplification was the phrase used in one of the slides.
Yeah.
Whose phrase was that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, often amplification refers to collection of seed, and so, yeah, seed amplification is when you collect seed, and then when you collect it, you only have that handful, and you want more, right? You don't just want to, oh, there it is, it's gone. So often seed amplification is done at a farm where they grow out the seed, and then you grow more. So you amplify it, you take a small amount, and you make more and more. You know, depending on how much seed you have, it depends on the scale of amplification, right? Here we'll have small amounts of seed and we will grow them probably by hand or in containers to make more seed, but I don't think we'll ever have enough seed to, you know, seed an acre at hedgerow farms, for example, and then harvest pounds and pounds of seed.
I thought it meant that Margot and the urban tilth crew had amplified the native plants by strategic mowing.
Oh, no, usually seed amplification, yeah, no, normally it means increasing the amount of seed available by growing it out. So it can be in a farm setting or a nursery setting, or, but yeah, that's usually what seed amplification means.
It's a potential strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And then, was there another question? Oh yeah, Michelle?
Can you please talk about the fact that there were probably a lot of grasslands here historically? There's some old photos that you see. And I'd really like to see more grasslands because native grasses and the community and then the benefits of the pollinators things are really becoming rare throughout the whole state of California. So I'd like to see more of that, especially nectar for the monarchs. So could you talk about some of the research that you've done on that?
I guess I would just say that is one of our goals. Is I don't think all the ukes will be replaced with oak woodland and shrubland. We are hoping to increase grassland on site, and so it'll be sort of looking at where we think that can be supported, and then where we think we'll be successful. Because it can be an uphill battle if you choose the wrong place and you're trying to convert a weed patch to native grasses, but that is definitely one of our goals, is to increase the area of native grassland and native plants that provide habitat for butterflies and provide nectar sources on the hill. Yeah.
So wasn't the hill pretty much dominated by grassland?
Yeah, historic photos show it was grassland. It could be because there may have been burning to maintain grassland. A lot of Native American food sources and fiber sources are in grassland, so it was often maintained purposefully. So that doesn't suggest that oaks wouldn't grow here just because it was grassland. And I don't think it will ever be only grassland, but an increase in area of grassland is a goal.
Maybe the sandstone also encourage more grassland trees.
Yeah, no, that'll be interesting to look at too. Yeah, where we think it will do well in terms of soil depth, and areas of sandstone can be little islands for where native plants can do well. We'll be thinking about that.
I have a question. I think this for the city. And I'm so grateful for and impressed by all the expertise. It seems like you have expertise for each of the complex puzzle pieces here, which is so cool. And it makes my head think about cost. So I'm just curious, how is this funded? Who's paying? City, state? Do you have all the money you need for all the years you're doing this? Just how can you characterize?
So I mentioned before we have a Coastal Conservancy Wildfire Resilience Grant, and that is paying for our consultant studies to come up with a plan. We also do have some city funding. Beyond that, for implementing the plan, we'll need to get more funding for that, so we'll be applying for more grants, which we're actively researching. So, but yeah, we'll We'll get it done, don't worry. Yes.
There's a group in Albany that's been going through the courts to try to get the city to sell off a piece of our parkland right over there. And a previous judge previously had said, well, if there is a sale like that, it needs to be pretty sizable so that it's obviously private land. Is that is this group following that and how that would impact the design of a windbreak or other things if that whole section of the park becomes private land?
Which whole section are you referring to?
Right around where that concrete little pad is between the benches, but like I don't know how big exactly it would be, but it would be like the whole like southern end of the park.
That is a question for our planning department, and I would encourage you to send an email to our project email address, and we'll get that answered for you.
So I have a question about why the oak woodland is not a part of this. I guess it's fire prevention. But there, 4 old oaks in there last year. And then there's one without the grave, there's a tree, the largest frozen tree that I think it was 2 years ago lost their big branch. So what's left?
The question is the oak woodland part of this plan? And no, it's not part of the project area. We're focused on the eucalyptus right now and the fire hazard that it poses and figuring out the needs of the monarchs and other wildlife. The oak woodland, that would be a separate issue. Okay, I think we're gonna start wrapping it up.
We'll unleash Dana. There we go. First of all, thank you all so much for sticking through to the end. We truly appreciate it. And as a reminder, Nat, if you could raise your hand. If you want a flyer for the email address or links to the studies, they're over there. And this is an ongoing process. And just as a reminder, these are early days. Nothing has been decided. We haven't set the mowing schedule. We haven't said anything. We'll all be getting together and coming up with sort of 3 design and management alternatives that we'll be presenting to you and bringing back to the public for comment. We'd love to have you at those meetings and at those charrettes for your input and your concerns. So please stay in touch, sign up for the emails, and let us know your thoughts. This is your hill. It's everybody's hill, and we really want it to be as healthy and beautiful and functional as possible for Stu's buddies, the monarchs, as well as everyone else. So any closing comments from Margot or Nomad? But otherwise, I think you're free to go. There's spotting scopes set up behind you. If you haven't taken the opportunity to look at the monarchs, if they're still there, if we haven't scared them off with our loud booming voices, take a peek.
This one up, it's aimed really well. It's like a really great view.
Yeah. So take a look while you're here, and stay in touch, and we'll let you know when the next meeting is happening.
And then I'm gonna.
Thank you very much.
I'm gonna go walk over and get just to where we get an overview of the lower Monarch area. There's a site where the tree that caught on fire was taken out. I think it's very instructive to take a look at that.
If you want more drama and monarch excitement, follow Stu, I guess is the end of that. But
a lot of people, you told a lot of people to email to ask questions.
Yeah.
Will you be emailing those answers back to that email list so we can all hear the answers?
What we'll do is what we're in the process of getting put on the website from the public education session is that we post all of the questions we receive and all of the answers on the website so that everybody, even if you didn't sign up for the email, you can still share that link and share those questions and answers with other people.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.